Hi, this is Llyn Hunter, storyboard artist and illustrator, and today I kind of like to talk about how I got into animation in the first place. For those of you who are trying to get into the business nowadays, I don't know how much relevance this is going to have to what you're doing, but you might find a kernel of something in here that might give you an idea of where you're going in your profession. Okay, let's start at the beginning. This is about 1990. I had been in a number of professions in the graphic arts before I got into animation. I had been a graphic designer, an art director, and an illustrator before I got into animation. I had actually started working professionally as a graphic artist probably around 1979, 1980, and I had been in those other professions, and I decided that I had gotten tired of being an illustrator. I'd been an illustrator professionally at that time for 3 years full time, and being a freelance illustrator primarily for children's illustration was a bit difficult, primarily because they do not pay well for children's illustration. It is like the lowest of the low when it comes to illustration pay is for textbooks and workbooks and things like that nature. And that's primarily what I was doing. And at the time in Los Angeles, there were a few houses that would basically farm out storyboard artists to advertising agencies, so that if you needed like a storyboard for a 60-second spot, you could just hire a storyboard artist out from one of these studios, and you didn't have to keep anybody on staff. And I thought that would be a good job to have, where you could, go into a studio each day and they would get the call out, and then you go out to some advertising agency and you did a storyboard for them. And at that time, storyboards were not done on computers. They were done with markers, drawings with markers on pen, and you'd basically, again, go into an office, or you'd be hired by an ad agency and you'd work as a storyboard artist in an ad agency. That was one of the ways you could be a professional storyboard artist. But I wanted an 8-hour a day job. Again, I had had several before that, and working as a freelance illustrator, it was you do the deadline and you never say no to a job, or you didn't get another one. And after doing an 80-hour week for one particular job, I had gotten a bit of burnout. Now, while I was working as a freelance illustrator, I was also taking life drawing classes at the Animation Union. They were very inexpensive, and I would go in one a week on Tuesday, and I'd take life drawing from Glenn Vilppu, and we had 2-minute poses, and it was my way of getting out of my studio once a week and just basically changing my brain, getting my mind in a different mindset, and enjoying life drawing. And at the time, they were offering a storyboarding class with Scott Shaw, and it was on the same night as Glenn Vilppu's class, and I'd been taking from Glenn for 4 years by this time. And I said to Glenn, gee, Glenn, I really love your class, but I need to take storyboarding because I'm thinking about I want to get into storyboarding as a profession. And he looked at me and he said, oh, you want to get into storyboard? And I said, yeah. And he said, you want to work for me? And I about fell on my face. Like I said, I'd been drawing in Glenn's class for 4 years and really enjoying the time, and like I said, getting away from my studio. And he at the time was doing storyboard and layout for a new TV series called Peter Pan and the Pirates by a bizarre named studio of Project X, which was actually Fox. They were starting up a children's animation studio, And they didn't have a name for it yet, and they didn't want anybody to know that it was Fox Studios, so they called it Project X. And Glenn just happened to be, he was working, previous to this, he had been working on Fox and Hound for Disney. And now he was working doing layout for these folks as well as storyboarding. And it just had gotten overwhelming for him to do both. And he had suggested to Gwen Wetzler, who was in charge of production at that time, that I would come in and clean up his boards. And I literally, at the time, I was full-time freelance illustrator. I could do anything I want. I had actually made my money for the year to cover for my expenses and what have you. And I took a pay drop of like, half of what I was making. I was making about $1,000 a week. And I dropped down to $500 a week so that I could learn storyboarding while working on Peter Pan and the Pirates. Glenn would do the storyboard panels on Post-its. And at that time, storyboards were all done on 11 by 14 sheets of paper, and with 3 panels on each sheet, and they were about 2.5, 3 by 4, about 3 by 4 inches on an 11 by 14 sheet of paper, or 8.5 by 14. It's legal size, and so there were 3 panels on the board. And Glenn would do his storyboard panels on large Post-its, and he would rough them out, and then I would put them on a light box and put the Post-its behind the paper on the light board, and I would basically clean everything up and put everything on model, and he would put down quick shot information on each. And Glenn was a layout guy. And when you do layout for animation, you're basically setting up the initial shots for the animator and the camera person when you do layout. It's like they usually work from a storyboard, and they will do the large backgrounds along with the keys. They'll set up the keys for the animator so that the animator doesn't have to start from scratch. They basically have everything that, if you're a good layout artist or character layout artist, you'll have everything more or less on model for them and close to the initial pose. And that makes it easier for the animators so that you've got the keys there. You might have the beginning, the middle, and the end of the pose in the sequence. And then the animator will use your layout drawings as a springboard. So like I said, it's to make the entire process go quicker. So the thing is that I was learning both layout and storyboard from one of the best people in the industry by taking a huge pay cut and working on Peter Pan and the Pirates. And that is how I got into animation. Primarily because I had had 10 years of art direction and graphic design and 3 full years of working my butt off illustrating. So I was drawing my brains out for 3 years, even before I got into animation. And just because I was taking classes, life drawing classes, over at the Animation Union, I got my foot in the door. And the one thing that I would really like to say, if anything, when it comes to getting into the animation industry, it's always about who you know and then what you know. I was always thinking, okay, it's hard work, it's my skills, it's who I am. Those are the things that will get me across the line. That's part of it. The major thing I feel, especially for animation, try to get to know people who are in animation. Get to know associate producers, join women in animation. Even if you're a guy, join women in animation. Find yourself a mentor. Go over to the animation union. Get to know people there. If you're not in Los Angeles, go to an animation hub. Every major city has some kind of animation hub, whether it's in commercials. If you really want to get into animation, I sincerely suggest Los Angeles or Toronto if you are on this continent, my continent, North America. I hate to tell you, boys and girls, the rest of the world is taking us over. Canada and Europe have got their own little hubs, and they're taking a huge chunk of the market now. Asia's taking a very big chunk of the market. Australia's doing a good job. It's not, Los Angeles is not totally Mecca anymore, but it is still the hub. Get to know somebody in animation. I don't care how you do it. Go take classes at the union. One of my best suggestions, get to know people at, was it CTNX? But it really does help if you want to really get into animation. That's the first thing. The second thing, you got to know what you're doing. If you haven't trained, where there are all kinds of places all over the internet, you don't need to go to a school. You don't need to waste your money at a school. The reason why I will not teach at a university per se for animation, I don't believe in people nowadays wasting the huge amount of money that they charge at any university or any school now. You can get all that learning and you can still not be hired to be in animation. My background is in illustration. My background is in graphic design. I just happen to be an animation junkie and a film junkie. So I had a lot of training even before I ever got into animation, just because I watched way too much television when I was a kid. I watched all the old movie classics. I understood cutting because I watched tons of movies. And I didn't know that I was training myself up while I was watching all those movies, all those classics. I learned cutting from them. I learned cutting from watching way too much Bugs Bunny. So that's how I got into animation. In this day and age, Disney puts out its feelers. It pulls in all these, get involved in an intern program, however you can do it. If any of the major studios has an intern program, if you can find any way to be a janitor at the studio so you can get to know who the directors are there and put your drawings underneath their noses while you're working as a janitor, do it. I've known two people who were, one was a PA, which is known as a production assistant. Get to be a production assistant. You'll get to know people. But you have to get to know people who are in the industry to get in the industry. There are those rare exceptions who, man, they get in just because they're talented. And they will. And there will always be those. I'm good. I'm not great. What I do is I do what I'm told and I get it done on time, and I'm personable. I don't argue with my directors. If somebody tells me this is what I want you to do, and I can suggest to them, but be somebody that everybody likes to be around too. That's the other thing. Have a personality that can work with people. Otherwise, gang, I don't know much advice to get you into the industry these days. I've talked about it in some of my past videos, how I basically aged myself out of this industry. I'm also tired of the deadlines. The deadlines are insane nowadays. They will work you to death. And I'm sorry to say that, but it doesn't matter whether you're in a union shop or a non-union shop. You will be worked to death. Your career will be short. I suspect that most of those of you going into animation these days will be lucky if you have 10 years. And then something else is going to come by the wayside. There are too many of you out there right now. When I got into animation, the other thing I forgot to tell you, when I got into animation, they were shutting animation down in Los Angeles. And Disney came up with a thing called the Disney Afternoon, where all of a sudden, the Disney Afternoon was making more money. It was 4 cartoons in a block that they sold to every city in the United States, because every city in the United States had to have children's programming. And all of a sudden, Disney found a way to make their cartoons make a crud load of money. They were making more money than any other theme parks ever could. So they needed us. All of a sudden, they wanted animators, and there weren't anymore. They had let them all go. Saturday morning cartoons hadn't been making as much money, and all of a sudden, Westinghouse bought Filmation. This is all animation history stuff. But when I got into animation, there was a hunger for anybody who could draw. So that's another reason why I got lucky. I was at the right place at the right time with the right skills. And I can't say enough how I firmly believe putting yourself in the right place in the right time. You can try to do that. You can try to have the best skills in the world. That might get your foot in the door. I still say luck has the biggest star that I got to be where I was and what I did for as long as I was. It was work, hunting, patience, and personally, not having a family. I had a husband, I had a spouse, I did not have children. I personally don't think I could have had a 33-year career in animation if I'd had children too. Now, I know some women who do. There are several people that I know. I can think of 3 on the top of my head who had kids, and they were able to do it. And they actually retired out of animation. But the number of women who didn't have kids were even more. And then the number of women who were artists in animation, you can count probably in the 20s, 30s, maybe 40s who did what I did in this country. It is not the easiest job in the world. I can honestly say I had 33 years of a roller coaster ride that I loved. And I still say I was blessed to be able to do everything. Even the bad parts of animation for me were good. But that doesn't mean you're going to get in. On the final note, don't stop drawing. Don't stop giving up your dreams. Just because you can't get into a studio doesn't mean you can't make good animation. It doesn't mean you can't do what you want to do with your life. It just means it's going to be difficult, and it's going to take Lady Luck smiling on you. And like I said, you can sometimes turn that luck in your direction, but not always. That's about it for my getting into the animation industry story. Thanks for listening. This is Llyn Hunter, LLYNHUNTER. I'll be posting something again next week. Thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate your time. Okay? Have a good one. Keep drawing. Always keep drawing. Thanks much. Bye-bye.